What happens to Indian SaaS companies? Now, are there certain kinds of Indian SaaS companies that you think are better positioned for this future? You gave the example as an example, Sidhu. You spoke about, say, Salesforce. You said that it is not true that AI companies are coming and disrupting SaaS companies. In fact, one could argue that SaaS companies are adopting AI faster than AI companies coming themselves. Are there similar examples in certain sectors, in certain types of companies in Indian SaaS? Because we have examples of Indian SaaS which are mostly, some examples are horizontal players like your Zoho and Freshworks, etc.
Can I want to kind of go one level deeper into this question, which is, Sumant, and please correct me if I'm wrong. If you're a Western SaaS company, you've already gone through one round of disruption and threats from Indian companies who were essentially using cost arbitrage and being able to put less expensive developers in order to compete with you. So you're that foreign company. But if you're an Indian company now, the problem I've seen with many Indian businesses is it's always cheaper to throw people at the problem.
The Bangalore buffer.
That's right.
I know there was a word for it, but okay.
No, so it's a very real, because you think, and by the way, it's not just true of software, right? Like, what is the entire quick commerce business? If not, but why is it that globally the quick commerce business hasn't taken off, but it's taken off in India? Why? Because we have a surplus of people who don't have jobs and are willing to work at very low margins. But that's a separate matter altogether, right? But I'm saying that
there's a very interesting parallel there, right? About quick commerce, right? Why is it, in hindsight, everything seems to make sense, right? And what was the flip, right? The flip, at least in my opinion, is that once people have experienced the benefits of having 10-minute delivery, everything else seems antiquated.
Which was an exponential jump. Because it was so you're making the AI to
at the starting of the journey, you don't think that might be that.
In fact,
valuable.
we dished it. We said, who wants things?
But once you experienced it, then it becomes the only way people that becomes the status quo.
So in fact, the interesting thing, the question over there with all of the quick commerce model was the unit economics. It wasn't the time.
I don't think it was about the unit economics. People were still losing money.
I don't think it's still solved.
No, it is custom. The difference now, though, is about customer expectations, right? And AI is doing the exact same thing to SaaS.
So this is my point. You give a customer faster, significantly faster, they will not go back. The price has to be right, for sure. You can't give them faster at 5x the price and expect anything to work. But you start making it faster.
Okay.
And you get the price right. That customer will switch to you and they're never going back to the previous model.
All right, gentlemen, we agree. Indian SaaS companies.
Yeah, let's talk about that question, that about who is vulnerable. So I think I sort of in my mind, like, we need to see it through a survival matrix, right? So there's the red zone.
Great. There's a 2x2.
2x2.
Nice.
How can you avoid?
Thank you. I love guests who bring 2x2s to 2x2.
Right. So there's the red zone and the green zone. Right?
Okay.
So the most vulnerable folks are obviously in the red zone, right? The ones who are in the red zone are companies who are around, let's say, generic workflow automation tools, right? So what we can think of feature commodities, right? There are also many companies that are just doing basic data processing kind of stuff, right? So those people are obviously going to be casualties. And then because the SaaS universe has expanded so much, there were a lot of companies, they were just one-hit wonders, single feature companies. Those are also going to be in trouble, right? And finally, there are a lot of Indian SaaS companies, unfortunately, which were just doing the arbitrage play. They were pure arbitrage plays in terms of trying to win on costs. All of those guys are.
So, Sumant, what are the axes on your matrix?
It's about who's going to survive and who's not, right? It's as simple as that.
So it's just like X to Y.
X to Y, right? So and obviously it's also about how does the game change, given that AI is now come and flipped many of these axes itself, right? And so just on the ones on the green zone, and to complete your thing about who are the ones who are likely to still be resilient, like I was saying, the ones that who are deep vertical SaaS, because they have that domain expertise, they have the data, I think those companies actually have the room to really grow now, right? So you have companies which are focusing on a single industry, maybe a single audience. Those kind of companies have a right to win.
Interesting. All these years, the playbook used to be
the opposite.
You may start with a narrow use case, become a vertical player, and then raise enough VCs money, and then the VCs will push you to become a global player or a large generalist player. Yeah. Now you're saying in some senses the reverse. Those who decided to stay vertical will win.
Correct. And the reason for that is in a sense, AI has sort of killed the binary choices of the old world, right?
Wow, what does that mean?
So in the old world, you had to choose between, let's say, cheaper and better, right? You could have cheap solutions or you could have better solutions, but you couldn't have something that was both cheap and better than the status quo,
This is
right?
true.
And the second one, again, which I think Sidhu alluded to, is the choice between what I'd like to think of as reach and richness, right? So you could have a general purpose tool that would cover a lot of people, or you could have a very rich tool that is sort of hyper personalized to a small set of people, right? You couldn't have both of these things. You could choose only one over the other.
Interesting. The closest example I can think of is like a content management system.
Yeah.
Like WordPress has reach, right, by far.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you were to go into a specific vertical and say, is there a CMS for that vertical? It may not be WordPress.
Right, and it might be,
heavily
even going much narrower than that. Let's say that you want a content generation system that's trained on your brand voice. Earlier, you couldn't afford it unless you were a big company, right? Now, every individual can actually have an AI agent or an assistant that's trained on his, his or her voice, right? So now this opens up a lot of markets, right? If you think about it, how the game changes now. Earlier, you could never go and have a solution that caters to, let's say, a small startup, because, like for instance,
the cost doesn't make
would have been
sense.
prohibitive.
Because you're saying if you're targeting a narrow market, then how much money is there? You're
so
saying
it
now it's
opens up
possible.
all of these things, and added to this is this entire new thing about services as software, which is where people are saying that now, because you have the opportunity to actually layer on services on top of software, you now have a play for a much larger market.
What does that mean?
So
Services
AI
on
is
top
not
of
just
services?
eating software.
This-
AI is also eating the labor market.
This is in fact my segregation of the this thing. That
What is services on top of software mean? Sorry, just before, since you mentioned that, what does it mean, services on top of AI?
I don't sell you my unit testing platform. You subcontract all your unit testing work to me. I will get it done for
actually
you.
get.
I will get
fine,
the work
fine.
done
So
for
this
you.
is the example of I don't hire your
You don't pay me a SaaS
candidate
license.
management or assessment software.
I will give you
I pay
candidates.
you per assessments that you do.
Yeah.
I do
Outcome
assess.
based
I give you
pricing.
assessments or I give you candidates.
Got it. This is outcome based pricing.
Yes.
So I see the same question that Sumant answered, in the context of you were asking you asked Sumant, what Indian SaaS companies will survive? I mean, you work with IT services. Which IT services companies will survive and which won't?
I think it's way too early to call. Right?
For a guy who was saying everything is getting disrupted and this
I
thing,
know.
it's like...
I told you, I have to keep eating my words, and the stronger they are, the harder I have to eat them. But look, I will tell you this much. I believe that you are talking about reworking the absolute core ratios on which these businesses have run for years, right? Which is the ratio of senior to junior.
How many project
juniors-
managers, senior
Yeah.
developers?
No, it is not just how many at the top, because at the end of the day, at scale, you're always making your margin at the youngest layers of that
Got
pyramid.
it. The pyramid, as much as you flatten it,
Now-
you get more profitable.
Correct. So now that entire pyramid is going through wild swings for individual subsections of the workflow, depending on new tooling coming out every month. Who's going to land where 5 years from now? Nobody knows. But what I can assure you is the end result has to be something that is extremely light, extremely fast, and capable of absorbing enormous demand. Because demand is going to go up. I'm predicting a 5x jump in demand for software services.
Why?
Because now I can get something made cheap and fast. I just go ping them.
But wait, I mean, it seems a little odd, right? Like all these years you're saying that, we had too much SaaS. Now we're going to rebound and say,
You're going to
let's
see a
get rid of...
Cambrian explosion of custom software, and that's going to create its own set of consequences.
I'm guessing this is cyclical. At some
No,
point
but I
in the
think
next 5 years.
I think the
Sorry, this goes back to your example of dentists in Midwest. What you're really saying is that there are micro markets like that are suddenly going to say, well, we need a software for us.
Exactly, right?
And
The point here is that till now, probably a persona like that would have never searched for something like this, right? But now people are aware of what we'd like to think of as the ChatGPT moment, right? So now you have this almost magical experience where there is you're generating content that would have taken hours or days, or probably you would have never been able to generate content of that quality. You're doing it on the fly, on demand, in seconds. Now everybody is now thinking about what job is it of mine that I'm doing that I can similarly bring a magical experience to. So there is an enormous, there's a enormous change in the way people are looking for software. Like earlier, SaaS had to be sold. AI will be bought, right? It's not the other way around.
What you just listened to was a brief 10-minute segment from the nearly hour and a half long discussion in episode 21 of 2x2. Hosts Rohin and Praveen were joined by guests Sumant Raghavendra, co-founder and CEO of Presentations.ai, and Sidhu Ponnappa, co-founder and CEO of Railfast. They explored how AI will reshape and in some cases annihilate Indian SaaS companies. To hear the entire conversation, consider getting a premium subscription to the Ken or becoming a premium subscriber to 2x2 on Apple Podcasts. This episode of 2x2 was produced by me, Hari Krishna, and mixed and mastered by Rajiv CN. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, colleagues, and family. If you're new to the podcast and want to get a sense of what a full episode of 2x2 is like, I recommend listening to a recent episode about Ola Electric's challenges and how the electric two-wheeler market in India has evolved over the past few years. We released that episode about a month ago, and it's currently unlocked on all podcast streaming platforms. You'll find the link in the show notes. We'll be back next Thursday with a new episode. Until then, goodbye.